Greetings. My name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, the Core New Core, and anyone interested in surviving and thriving as a Pilates instructor. There's just 3 things on my list today. And still, I didn't come up with a summary statement, which I usually do. So I'll see if I can tell when there's a summary to be had or had been. Number 1, and I'm not going to say a lot about these. Number 1, theory is one thing, practice another. So theory is one thing, practice is another. And then number 2 is the inconvenient truth about Pilates. So that's the inconvenient truth about Pilates. And number 3 is presumption of perpetuity. And what keeps me, hopefully in some way, focused on my broadcast is that it's intended to enable you to survive and thrive as a Pilates instructor. And if you're not interested in Pilates, what you may pick up about core new tension may come into play in whatever other way you move or influence movement. Theory is one thing, practice is another. And I would suggest that Pilates has always been a practice. And because so little was produced by Joe as a way of explaining his work beyond his book and the film and the pictures that he took, right? Beyond the original work and within the original work, I think is what I mean to say, there's very little within the original work that anyone has used to influence their practice. Now, I can hear the chorus saying, oh, but that's all we do, and yes, that's all true. But I'm talking about the tsunami wave of Pilates passion, and that within that wave, there are those who wish a distinction about Pilates that is based on a reasoned argument. Seems like I'm not the only one, but the other one I met recently is from at least a generation or 2 away, and looking to make a distinction of what it means to be a comprehensive Pilates instructor. And that's what comes with the territory of having a passion for what you do and responding to the variety of expression that you see around you. So my point, first of all, is that Pilates is mostly a heritage of practice. And there hasn't been slim to any real theory about, or there hasn't been a reasoned argument about a theory that there might be an ideal within Joe's original work. And so when you talk about theories, you base them on something, and in an academic paper or in an academic perspective or presentation, you're presenting a reasoned argument based on evidence. And so now we're talking about theory. What's your theory and what's your evidence based on? Okay? Number 2, the inconvenient truth about Pilates is that Pilates has an essence of its own. Now, this is just my opinion. That's the MMP point of view, is that insofar as it has an ideal, or insofar as there is an ideal, a perceptible ideal within the original work, then that sort of undermines a presumption that really all Pilates is a practice, and it's all a subjective pool that you swim in, where it matters not so much what it is as much as what you're doing with what you make of it. See the difference? Maybe there is no difference. But if there is an ideal, it will have its own coherence. It will stick together by itself. It will defend itself because of its ideal nature. So the inconvenient truth is that as much as, by and large, the Pilates culture treats Pilates like a practice, by virtue of the mere numbers involved in the tsunami of Pilates passion, there's me and there's you, and there will be others that are interested in, a rational, reasonable explanation about what it is that is not necessarily attached to practice, or what practice is made of outside of the reasoned view that MMP is, and surely there are others and will be others. And they will always, I think, be in a minority, just because human nature, doesn't want too much information. And it wants to be able to embrace the passion it feels for Pilates, and to the extent that they want, in the way that they want, making as much money as they can for them and for what feels good for them. For some, there is no commercial interest. But see, if there is no commercial interest, meaning you don't need to make money, don't want to make money, you do it all for free, you give away all of what you make teaching Pilates, instructing Pilates, all goes to a non-profit charity. See, so even if all that's true, what was I going to say? I don't know. What I comment on from there is, if you're after confidence in being an instructor, I think confidence comes from understanding. And with understanding comes comprehension and control. And from there, it's all gravy as to what you make of it, off of the ideal in which it exists, whether you recognize it or not, and whether anything you do from your exposure to it resonates or not with what it is. allowing everyone to not have to screen or look at something they're passionate about in a way that they don't want to look at. You know, that comes under the category of discretion. And if you want to survive, it's good to allow a person their own view of things and participation in things as you keep them safe and are inspired by all that you are as a human being. Number 3, the presumption of perpetuity. Oh, all right. So we're talking about theory and practice. And the presumption of perpetuity is that there's a presumption about the way things are now will be the way things are into perpetuity. And in some ways, in some ways that's true, and in other ways it's not. And the key thing is to discern the difference between those things that won't change and those things that might change. And just like the conditioning you do for Pilates, condition your capacity as an instructor so that you can survive not only in an arena. So what change am I talking about? I'm talking about a primary Pilates culture world that's all practice. And, you know, if there's any real theory in it, scientific studies, yes, and data, yes, to measure this or that, yes. But Pilates hasn't even begun, in my opinion, to be appreciated for the science that's in it that's beyond what it's currently being measured for. And by that I mean that the perspective of looking at Pilates from a practice standpoint where people taught you and you practiced, right? And you got to a point where you turned around and started teaching others. But when it came time to, in my opinion, you know, where is theory taught about the subject itself? I mean, is there even a subject itself to have a theory about? I mean, to what extent is it all just practice and heritage and tradition? And yet, there's hope out there because I had a conversation, a text message with someone impassioned about making a distinction between a comprehensive Pilates instructor versus those that weren't. And looking for, well, actually expecting to produce a criteria for that distinction, part of which would be an academic paper, which sounds and is very impressive, especially when you look specifically at an academic paper, and Google tells me that's a reasoned argument based on evidence, and it helps me understand the MMP point of view, and it helps me understand what that teacher is looking for as a means to create a distinction in Pilates of whether it's comprehensive or not. Like complete control, contrology. Um, in what I've been broadcasting about the tsunami wave of Pilates passion, I guess that's redundant because a tsunami is a wave. So a Pilates tsunami of passion, the presumption of perpetuity is that the way Pilates is perceived and understood expands way beyond just the practice of it and expands significantly in the theory of it. And within that realm of looking for a reasoned argument based on evidence for what's the distinction between a comprehensive Pilates instructor and someone who isn't, economically, the target is to create a certification that requires annual renewal, and that's your annuity based on the association you get from the certificate. That's why Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates have value to claim that I think is really significant, but it may take a generation or two, and I'm hoping that at least by the year 4040, core retention will have become obvious, and that will, I think, that will draw more attention to the point of view of MMP. So not only is there a presumption of perpetuity that practice matters more than theory, it's the expansion of the illumination of more theory that will also come in to try to dissect Pilates into an intellectual assertion that completely exists within the intellect and leaves out the observing part of the essence of what it is, because our thinking capacity tends to do that. It's in that thinking capacity of projection and presumption of perpetuity that only who you are is the fabric of the Pilates court. And the tsunami passion for Pilates, I think, will put real stress on an identification of what makes it special. And in that pursuit, part of it will be rational, and it being rational, hopefully they will find some stability. You as a student or a viewer will find some stability in the rationale behind MMP. Because MMP is a rational look at Pilates. I guess, and so that's, if I'm saying that, well, I said that pretty well, I think, already. I wrote that the way things are now, structured, it's all pretty much a tradition, a practice, right? It's a practice. It's something you pass on. And it's you that you're passing it on through, or more about you, because that's what you've got is your practice. With very little theory based on evidence for identification of distinction. And the change coming, I think, will be there will be more people within the bigger population. There will be some that want a rational explanation, or at least they'll pretend they do. And there will be those that pretend they do, but really don't. It's up to you to see behind the curtain, read between the lines, add two and two, direct your own thinking. The great thing about the MMP theory, the MMP reasoned argument, the MMP identification of an ideal based on the evidence in Joe's book is a very clear, I want something clear that you can look through. Like, it's a very clear piece of acrylic. Now, what's inside of this is a model of the earth, right? It's a concept. What's inside the piece of acrylic that is the MMP point of view? It's solid. You can stand on it. It's based on reality. It's based on physics and math and biology, the human being's response to that. I'd like to acknowledge the passing of a Pilates instructor I never knew personally, but I knew was involved with Romana's view of Pilates, which was very classical, of course. And how sad to see any buoy to navigate by extinguished, the light extinguished. So it's a loss for the whole community and culture. And life can't live forever. Read between the lines, see behind the curtain. Read between the lines again, I just said. And usually I start with read between the lines, see behind the curtain, add two and two, direct your thinking. Geist.